Hi everyone! For my first painting demonstration, I've chosen a wine bottle and glasses, a simple still life, and my goal is to show you how I work with large brushes for the most part. I'll be using a 2-inch brush and a 1-inch brush, and I'd also like to demonstrate my method for what I call economical brushwork. And what I mean by that is that I like to mix up my color, put it down, and for the most part leave it alone. I try not to keep dabbing over the same brushwork that I just put down because I think that takes away from the bold look that I'm after. So that's what my goal is for this demonstration. I start out with a quick sketch, and I start out in a light color like yellow or ochre, and then as I refine the drawing I start working in another color where I see I might not have made the placement correct, and I refine it and change the proportions or do whatever I need to do. Since I can't keep going over it in yellow to change it because I can't tell what my new strokes are, I move on to a new color, and in this case I've chosen a red color. So that's just simply so that I can keep track of what my revisions are. I can tell by the colors I've worked with. If my drawing still has problem, I may go in with a third color, like blue, just so I can see where I've ended up. So what you're seeing there is just my drawing, just trying to get my proportions correct. Now you'll see I'm going in and I'm laying in my dark color first on the wine bottle. I'm using the 2-inch brush here, and I'm basically just mixing up my paint, the color and the value, the darkness or lightness that I think it requires, and I'm just going in stroke by stroke. Just trying to get each color as accurate as possible. There's some little highlights and reflections that I put them in as I see them. I try not to focus too much on the details first. I try to get the big shapes in and then put in whatever details I feel are necessary a little bit later on. You'll see that I like to wipe off my brush with paper towel. I don't clean it off in water unless I'm completely moving to another color family. So I'm putting on a few little details here, little modifications where the glass might get a little lighter or a little darker. So I want you to notice that I do try to just put down one stroke at a time and leave it alone. I twist and turn my brush in order to get the direction of the stroke that I'm after, and I use the end of my brush as if it's a small brush. Rather than move to a small brush, I just use the very end of my flat brush and use just the far right or the far left edge of it to give me the definition or whatever control I need. I find that this is a prettier look than using small brushes. It's just a personal preference, I guess you would say. But I think that the look that I get from doing everything with a big brush, excuse me, is a little more bolder, I guess is the best word, than picking up a lot of little small brushes to get that detail. Detail is important, so I'm not saying that I disregard all detail. I just accommodate the detail with a big brush. Sometimes I'll go through a whole painting using the same brush for the entire painting. So now I'm putting on the top that goes on the bottle, putting in a few reflections. You can see I'm using the very, very tip of my brush. And now I'm putting on a couple of little reflections that go where there are ridges at the top of the bottle. Now what I've got, I'm using a slightly smaller brush. I think it's probably about 1 inch, because I did not draw in the truck. So I'm just drawing in the parameters of the truck right now. The name of this wine is called Red Truck. I think the only reason I buy it is because I love the illustration on the front. I'm not really sure if it's the best wine, but the illustration is beautiful. That's how I end up picking a lot of the wines I drink, because I love the labels. So I'm just basically sketching in the truck, and I am using a smaller brush for this. I'm working on Strathmore 11 by 14 500 series mixed media board. So the scale of my painting is not huge. I'm trying to keep the shapes somewhat abstract. I am not out to make this photographic looking, and that's really the goal that I have when I paint. I like keeping it gestural. I like keeping it loose. I try not to get too picky. So it's constantly a juggling act between keeping it loose but also getting the control that I want as well. I always wanted to have somewhat of a gestural, energetic feel, so I'm always trying to make sure that it has as much detail as it needs without going overboard and getting too fussy. I try to do things in as few strokes as possible. I'm going in now and coloring in the glasses. And if you noticed in the photograph, the horizontal plane of the wine is really the same color as the sides of the glass where you're looking at the wine. There's really not much difference between the two. So what I've decided to do was exaggerate that as if there were light shining down on the wine glass, so that that top plane is a lighter value than the color that's on the sides, which is a deep burgundy. I'm taking that artistic license just to give it some depth, because otherwise I think it would look really flat. So you'll notice I'm I'm twisting and turning my brush a lot. I use that wide end and just do a lot of twisting of my wrist in order to get the paint to go in a smooth movement. If you put down a stroke and it's not exactly right, if you keep going over it, you may end up with somewhat of a muddy looking stroke, or the stroke doesn't look like it was put on in a loose, painterly fashion. So I'm trying to do things and accomplish what I'm trying to paint in as few strokes as possible. I'm always aware of not going over a passage unless I absolutely need to. So if I can get away with it and it looks pretty good, I just leave it alone. So now I'm going into the background. I like to do my background towards the end. A lot of people like to start with their backgrounds. I suppose that's because they feel that they cover a lot of territory very quickly. But I'm more comfortable working on my subject matter first. And I don't always get the drawing right. Sometimes I go too far outside of the parameters of the object, and by doing the background next, it allows me to carve in where I may have needed a little bit of refinement in getting the drawing correct. So sometimes if I've gone too far outside the lines, I can use my background to carve in the shape and make it more accurate, or modify the proportions a little bit. So I'm using a fair amount of paint on my brush. I don't know if you can tell by looking at it, but my brush is pretty well loaded up with paint. And I like having my brushwork go in a lot of different directions. You'll also notice that I don't overmix. I like to let the paint mixtures be not overly blended, so that it allows me to have some pretty striations. For instance, if I'm mixing up a green and I'm mixing blue and yellow together to create that green, I'll mix the blue and the yellow together somewhat, but I don't mix it up to the point where it's one completely flat color green. I'll let some of the blue and the yellow stay somewhat unmixed so that they mix together while I'm putting the colors down on the canvas. So now I'm just carving in around the bottom edge of the first wine glass. And now I'll carve in around the bottom of the bottle. I got a dark blue spot there, which I'm going to try to get rid of. Got a little bit too dark there. And now I'm putting in the shadow behind the wine bottle. Even though there isn't a shadow in the photo, it's just my feeling that it needs something there. So that's called artistic license, and you can use that whenever you want. If you feel like your painting needs more shadow, or you feel that it needs something that's not in the photo or in front of you, if you're painting from life, it's certainly your option to do what you think it needs. A lot of times putting in a shadow will make an object seem a little more grounded than if it just seems like it's floating there with no shadow underneath it. Now I'm putting in a little bit of definition under the bottom of that wine glass. Also, I think it needs it there too. And in the photo, you really can't even see the stem of that second wine glass. And I feel that it needs a little help there as well. So now I'm putting in the glass part, and since glass is perfectly transparent, what we're really doing is we're seeing through to what's behind it. I'm basically just painting what I see, not a lot of artistic license going on there. It's a little tricky doing work like this with a 2-inch brush. And if I weren't demonstrating, I might use a smaller brush for some of these finer areas. But I thought it would be interesting, just for the purposes of this demonstration, to show you that you can get a lot of fine definition just by using your brush in a more controlled way. So one of the misconceptions about the way I paint is that it's not fast and furious. It's not fast and wild. It's basically fast only because the brushwork is economical. I put down my stroke. For the most part, I leave it alone. So that's what makes the painting go fast. Not that I'm working at such a furious, wild kind of rate, or in a kind of a wild fashion where I'm just, with my brushwork, moving very quickly. As you can see, it's fairly deliberate, and I think before I put down each stroke. I decide what direction I want to move in. I decide what color I'm after, what value, how light or dark the color should be. I mix it up, put it down, and leave it alone. And that's what makes the painting go fast. Not that I'm working at such a warped rate, but just that I decide before I put my brush stroke down what I'm going to do, and then I do it. So now I've moved on to the 1-inch brush for the reflections on the glass. And maybe a dab or two here or there. For the most part, it's probably done. Just around the rim, I'm catching a little bit of definition. A little bit of the red I carried down through the bottom of the wine glass. Helps to unify it a little bit. I usually save the highlights for last. I'm putting the highlights on the big wine bottle right now. And those fine little last touches, I like to leave those for last as well. I usually take a look at the painting and decide what it needs at the very end. And this is a tricky stage because it's very easy to start putting in every detail that you see at this point. But if your goal is more of a painterly impression of your subject matter, then be aware that it's better to leave it a little unfinished and judge it later than to start mindlessly putting in every detail that you see. I like to say sometimes that it takes 2 people to paint a picture. One to do the painting and the other person to stand behind them and then take the brush out of their hands when they're done. So here's the final piece. I think it's got the painterly gestural quality that I was after, and without it being overworked, and hopefully I demonstrated an economical way of putting your paint on. Brush work where you lay down your color and you do your best to leave it alone and try not to dab it too much. Okay, so that's it. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do, and I'm looking forward to meeting you online. Thanks for watching.